everyone, this is Becca with Faith Exposed. Thank you for being here. Today, I want to take a look at a question that I think is a pretty big hurdle for people who are in the deconstruction process. And I think the cause of the problem that I'll be describing is that Christianity spoils us to reality. It's sort of like a drug that gives us this overload of meaning and purpose, floods us with the idea that life has to be eternal in order to be meaningful. But this is all, again, one of the psychological hooks that the religion uses to keep adherents within its grasp. I have this sentiment so frequently brought up in the comments by Christians who watch my videos. And this sentiment was expressed by one of the viewers of my previous video who goes by the handle Joey. Welcome to atheism, where you have no truth, no morality, no love, no purpose, and no meaning to your life. Boy, that sounds like an awful worldview if you take him at his word. Clearly, I must have at least some truth, as I'm able to navigate life to the extent that I am. I don't bump into walls and trip over myself. I must have some grip on reality. I also clearly have enough purpose to motivate me to accomplish all of the things that I've accomplished in life since I've become an atheist. So his statement, taken at face value, is blatantly, provably false. I think what he's really saying is that he notices that I'm not accepting an imposition of love, meaning, and purpose from somebody else or from a God. I've derived my own purpose, meaning, and love from within and through the influences of my life experiences. So I would reframe Joey's statement to be more accurate as this. Welcome to atheism, where you have no external purpose and no external meaning imposed upon your life. The central claim being made here is very common to Christian apologetics, and it's basically saying that only externally imposed purposes are valid. But why should that be the case? Why is a purpose that's handed to us from somebody else superior to one that we've developed from within by the individual themselves? As we grow up, we gain more and more freedom and we become more self-directed, and we tell ourselves what we're supposed to be doing today. So to think that personally derived purposes are invalid and externally imposed purposes are valid is very problematic, because you are keeping yourself in a childish position. This understanding that meaning and purpose can be personally derived aligns with a thought framework called existentialism, whereas Christianity tells us that meaning and purpose can only come down to us from God. So we'll talk about all of this today because I personally love existing in existentialism. I found it so much better for me than Christianity. And let's keep in mind that if the factual claims of Christianity can't be demonstrated to be true, then really all it is this framework of meaning that a group of people created for themselves and then decided to try to impose on everybody else. And perhaps that's what religions are at the core. And the more successful a religion is at imposing their meaning on everybody, the bigger the religion becomes. So Joey's claim, and that of many Christians, is that there is no meaning or love or purpose to atheism, and in my case, existentialism. So in order to compare worldviews, let's take a step back and consider what is the goal of a worldview. I would say that the goal of a worldview should be that it accurately represents reality to us. So a good worldview would be one that maps as closely as possible to reality, giving us accurate information, whereas a bad worldview is one that clashes with reality and it steers us in the wrong direction when we're trying to navigate life. And I say this because a good, accurate worldview helps us to actually effectively reach our goals. A bad worldview may make us feel good, but if it doesn't help us to be effective and to actually reach our goals in the real world, then it's a poor worldview. As an example, let's say that one of my subjective moral values is that I like to eliminate suffering in others. But my worldview tells me that all I have to do is pray for somebody and they'll be healed. Then my child gets sick, and instead of bringing my child to the doctor to be cared for by medical professionals, Instead, I pray for them. My views on the effectiveness of prayer have prevented me from successfully upholding my value of wanting to alleviate suffering. Because my worldview doesn't map to reality, I wasn't able to alleviate the suffering for my child because I was misguided in thinking that praying would be the best way to accomplish this goal, when really bringing them to the doctor would have been more effective. So this is why I value the accuracy and truth value of a worldview far more than simply the comfort or meaning that it might bring me temporarily. Because a good worldview helps me to be effective. So if atheism and existentialism maps onto reality more accurately, then that means it brings more value, more meaning into my life. So to say that things like meaning and purpose are more important than accuracy is self-defeating, because you're admitting that it doesn't matter how successful you are at upholding your values. What matters is that you feel comforted in the moment. And I just find that to be pretty nihilistic. So what is existentialism? As far as what it means to me, existentialism is the beautiful and profound absence of imposition upon my agency. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines it as the philosophical theory or approach which emphasizes the existence of the individual person as a free and responsible agent determining their own development through acts of the will. A few key points to differentiate existentialism from Christianity would be that existentialism has no inherent meaning. It allows freedom to define the self. It involves anxiety and absurdity, and is heavy on personal responsibility, whereas traditional belief in Christianity presupposes divine purpose, comes with moral law, and divine will defines your purpose. It involves faith and hope in a transcendent order, and is heavy on obedience or submission to a higher authority. And some great quotes to help highlight the essence of existentialism would be, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself," says Sartre, highlighting the idea of a radical self-creation within existentialism. Sartre also highlights the inescapable freedom that is the essence of existentialism when he says, "We are condemned to be free." And Nietzsche highlights the authenticity that comes with existentialism when he says, "Become who you are." And Kierkegaard emphasizes the psychological cost of choice that comes with so much freedom when he says, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." Now, as an atheist, I no longer view life as having a right way and a wrong way to live, but rather it's an art, it's a subjective experience. And this doesn't make it any less meaningful. It just makes it more enjoyable.
We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end, success or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead. But we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played.
In Christianity, life is a test, and there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But without a God, life is truly this gift that we can choose how we want to live it. The ultimate existential question is, if I didn't have to live, would I still choose to? When we become complacent, we can take our complaining to the extreme. Would I rather not live? And so far, we've all come up with a reason for why we want to live. There's something that's motivating us to put one foot in front of the other. We have a purpose. We may not always be able to verbalize it or put words onto it, but there's all of these subconscious purposes and meanings that are keeping us going. And once we've established that at the highest level, life is just simply an art or a dance, not to be taken too seriously, then we can begin to add structure as we want to. But since nobody's telling us what to care about, we have to kind of figure out what our values are. A lot of times our values just kind of arise out of our daily life if you just sort of pay attention to what kind of things interest you, what excites you. These are all your natural values kind of rising to the surface. And you could also be more proactive at going out and trying to create something that you're interested in, or these kinds of things will help you to identify your core values. And of course, we all have many that are shared just through our immense amount of shared DNA and common cultural experiences. Now, one often difficult point for an atheist or existentialist would be believing that life is temporary. When we've been addicted to this idea of an afterlife, that kind of poisons the inherent meaning of a temporary life, especially when the religionists are specifically telling you that life is only valuable if it lasts forever. Well, the strong point of existentialism, in my opinion, is that it has accuracy. It maps well to reality. We have every reason to think that it's very likely life is only temporary. So how can we view this in a way that still allows us to derive meaning from life, even though we know it's ultimately going to end? Well, I consider the life and death of a loved one. If you've had any loved one pass away, just reflect on their life. Like, just because they died and it ended, does that mean it wasn't worthwhile for them to be here and to experience life? I think to say that a temporary life is worthless is as silly as saying watching a movie is worthless or listening to a song is worthless because it ultimately ends. When in reality, it was still this beautiful temporary experience that was worth going through, even if it came to an end ultimately. And in a big way that makes it even more meaningful, especially when you're in the midst of it and you know that it's finite. You're going to really treasure every moment and question how you're spending it. In a way, this is more special than feeling like you will always be burdened with existence and all of its struggles. And the way I look at it is that I will never die, because if I'm ever dead, then I don't exist and I'm not there to experience it. So death is never something that will encapsulate me or that I will be a part of. I will only ever experience being alive. So this helps me a lot, and I apply that also to my loved ones who passed away. For example, my older brother who passed away at about 31. The only thing there is to contemplate is the life part. The death is irrelevant because there's no one there to experience it. And we also have memories of our loved ones, so they're alive to us in that sense. I love living in existentialism. It's been so much more freeing, liberating, and meaningful to me than to have my purpose imposed on me and my meaning given to me by somebody else. Because only through the idea of having subjective meaning and subjective purposes can we really live our lives tailored to what we want. I'm certainly not saying that everyone needs or should feel the same way about existentialism that I'm expressing. Many people, even if they acknowledge that this is true, they may not enjoy it. When I first left Christianity, for the first year, I had an existential crisis. I was void of meaning and I didn't know how to live in the world now that I learned the map I had been given was false and faulty. At first, I didn't know what my meaning or my purpose was now as a non-believer. So I set off through this process of a whole year of emptying out previous purposes and meaning that were placed on me and slowly detecting what were my true meanings and purposes of life, and also working to cultivate them. I would actively be aware of what excited me, what made me put one foot in front of the other, what gave me the motivation to keep on going. And these are the things that brought meaning and purpose to my life. No one else could have dictated to me what they were. It was my own personal work to figure them out and to also cultivate them. Sometimes just existing, perceiving, and observing is all of the meaning that we need. Whereas other times we might need to be more energized. So I had a lot of days like that in my first year, but I did find that gaining understanding was something that was very meaningful to me. I was hungry for more knowledge and more understanding of the psychology that went behind this religion that I was involved in. So it didn't take long before just understanding the world and how it works became one of my main drivers and my main purposes in life. And I wouldn't be surprised if this came from a biological evolutionary drive, because there is a tremendous benefit to understanding where you are and gaining knowledge. So this was kind of an instinctual purpose that was arising. And I sometimes talk about neurodivergence here on this channel. So I would dare to say that some levels of autism and ADHD are a survival benefit, because along with them comes the ability to have hyper-focus or to be extremely interested in a specialized topic. And I did find that happening for me, and I just loved it. I came to life. Time went by like nothing when I would be researching these topics that interested me, especially when they were paired with some outward impact that I could have. In my case, it was computer science and programming. My degree had been in accounting, but I became very interested in writing code, and it was just like the best thing in the world to see the code accomplish things and impact the real physical world. Whereas as a Christian, everything was so spiritualized and ultimately was in the whim of God. So I didn't actually have control or influence over anything as a Christian. But as an atheist existentialist, I now had actual power. Maybe very little, but just to have any was immensely rewarding for me. And this is not at all to say that people who are not neurodivergent can't have these special interests and hyper-focuses, because they absolutely do. But it happens to be a common trait, especially pronounced in autism and ADHD. But with autism also comes a hypersensitivity, being very aware of any sensory things around you. And this also leads to heightened empathy for others, because basically any feeling or sensory input that you have is going to be heightened with autism. All of the stimuli around us gets maximized in our brains. So having too much meaning and purpose imposed on you can easily become overstimulating and counterproductive. And again, this can happen to anyone. It just happens to be pronounced in autism. So all of the stories from Christianity, the end times, the blood sacrifice, the profound guilt and shame for our sins easily becomes too much. And we can actually find a lot more peace from less meaning, or at least letting the meaning go for a while. But eventually we might start to feel bored and need some motivation to keep on going. So that's when we can start adding on more meaning and purpose, and we can bring it on to ourselves in a healthy way that's not too much or too little. And after I had essentially emptied out the meaning and purpose that came to me previously from Christianity, which was really a bit too much, I eventually wanted to cultivate my own, and I was having some trouble during that time. I think I was very vulnerable. I learned that it was okay to take and accept help from others who are on a similar path. And I actually derived a lot of meaning from the Eastern religions. I was, of course, turned off by any of them that had a god or pressured belief. So I was drawn to many of them that said, you don't have to worship a god, there is no god. But it had in place a framework of how to look at the mind and suffering and life in general. So I got into a lot of the core tenets of Buddhism. Buddhism really felt to me like an antidote to evangelical Christianity. It really counteracted and soothed all the areas that I had been damaged psychologically by evangelical Christianity. I don't refer to it too much anymore now that I've been able to cross over to the point of building my own meaning and my own purpose, but it really served an important role during that first year for me. Eastern thought more so emphasizes the impermanence of things, rather than the strong stance of denial that comes from Christianity, which wants to tell us impermanent things are worthless. Only the eternal can bring value to life. Eastern thought teaches stillness rather than manufactured cosmic dramas, which I think is more helpful in the day-to-day Western life. It also emphasizes self-awareness a lot more, as well as minimizing the ego, in contrast to Christianity, which has this strong self-rejection message. We're told that we live permanently with a sinful nature that is shameful.
Shame is rooted in the belief that you, as a human being, are fundamentally wrong. I have made mistakes. I recognize them. And I do not minimize their impact on myself or others, but I am not my mistakes. I am a growing, evolving human being, and I am working on healing the parts of myself that led me here. I honor my humanity by giving myself a second chance to try again.
Eastern focus is a lot more on the present moment and not letting it pass us by, whereas Christianity teaches us to gloss over the present moment because it's really all about this final cosmic battle and eternity in paradise. Buddhism also has a very different perspective on suffering than Christianity. Christianity, I found, steeped in toxic positivity, where if you acknowledge suffering, you're acknowledging failures of God. So Christians need to pretend it doesn't exist. But Eastern thought is all about accepting that suffering is a natural state in life, and it teaches us to embrace it and also to change our perspective of it so that it doesn't bother us so much. It's part of the package of the experience of existing. And what was really a win for me was the Buddhism that I was learning about taught that you do not have to believe its tenets. Like, we could care less if you believe it. Only attach yourself to this if it rings true, if it's helpful for you, if you choose to. Whereas in Christianity, we're told it's a choice, but this choice comes with unimaginable eternal consequences. So it's clearly not a true choice. It's like having a gun to your head. And most Buddhism teaches no deity, that there is no God at the center. But Buddhism itself does not put forth a deity. And there was a tremendous book about Taoism called The Four Agreements that really helped me during this time. The Four Agreements, written by Don Miguel Ruiz, suggest that we all agree to stand by four principles, and those are to be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. So when I found myself in a place where I wasn't really able to build up my own meaning and purpose because I was in such a vulnerable spot, I would let myself be supported by others who have already done similar work. And of course, I made sure that they resonated with my true intrinsic values. Going through these temporary periods of lacking any real meaning, purpose, and structure, to me, actually felt like a very easy yoke, or like a breezy wind that has no real purpose. It just is. I trained myself not to panic during those moments, but rather to embrace it, and I found meaning through that. So I would alternate between periods of rest and rejuvenation, and then periods of intense meaning and purpose when I attached myself to a special interest. So being indoctrinated into a religion is having a tremendous meaning imposed upon you from birth. And in most cases, you're never told that there's this safe option to reject the imposition of this meaning, or you will be despised and spiritually expelled from the family, if not physically. It's an extreme burden to be born into this perpetual spiritual war that might land you in eternal torment. We're told that even our young thoughts are part of the spiritual war, and there's never reprieve from this. There's no way to exit out of the battlefield. We're told the rapture will be coming any day now, and it's very possible that you won't ever reach adulthood or get to be married and have kids. Yet when their promises fail to happen and Jesus never does return, we're left dealing with the day-to-day fallout of living a life that you weren't prepared for. We still have to live in this world that we were told to despise and not to be prepared for, and we were never really given tools that are relevant to reality. My children are 6 years old and 9 years old, and they were raised completely absent of Christianity, and yet they seem to find plenty of meaning from their lives. The mere existence of animals seems to bring them so much happiness and meaning. My daughter and I had made homemade cookies together, and I said how it tasted so good, it must be a sin to eat these. And she looked at me, and I was so shocked. She said, "Mom, what's a sin?" And I was just so happy that she had lived 8 years of her life and had never encountered the concept of sin. She was not burdened by the ideas of original sin and all the shame that comes with being born a sinful human. I loved when I realized that she had not encountered that at all. So she was living a perfectly happy, meaningful life without Christianity. I know images of existentialism are often very dark and open and dusty and empty, but to me, that's not how I view existentialism. I see it as walking into a bright, open room or a blank canvas. What could possibly contain more hope and more potential than a blank canvas? And I think that kind of displays the subjective perceptions of this idea. Some people are scared of too much freedom and others thrive in it. One huge aspect of life that we get from atheism and existentialism, which we cannot get no matter how hard we try from Christianity, is that of true, genuine privacy. I think that everybody deserves true privacy sometimes in their life. And it's easy to see how we get that from atheism. Whereas in Christianity, we're perpetually being perceived by God, by angels, by demons. We're pretty much this walking show, always being judged. Within Christianity, there's no reprieve from that. You're never truly alone. And I think this is a psychological need that we all deserve, to be able to have a place where we're by ourselves. I was told that angels and demons were always watching me and conspiring how to win my soul. This might be adding meaning to life because you're so important that beings are always watching you. But this intense meaning is not necessarily better or even healthy. I think as a Christian, I was robbed from being able to enjoy being alone. But now I'm able to have a true comfort with being alone, and I quite enjoy it in moderation. I don't fear an empty room like I used to. But existentialism does not demand that we stay in an empty blank room forever. We have complete freedom to fill it however we decide. We can add things, remove things. We can pursue our interests and take a step back. We don't have to always be focused on God, the Word, and His kingdom. We can step back and focus on what we're naturally compelled to. And another aspect of life that I couldn't get from Christianity was having the freedom to pursue any interest that I have. Nothing is too sacred to look at with clarity. Whereas in Christianity, there's all these ideas that you can't touch. You're not really allowed to question. You shouldn't even expect to be able to understand life because we're considered incapable of ever understanding God's ways. With the concepts of radical freedom and radical personal responsibility permeating through the framework of existentialism, some may ask, how does this coincide with my views on there being no free will? How can I value personal responsibility and freedom so strongly when I don't believe that there's ultimately any free will? If you've seen my video on free will, you know that I ultimately believe that our wills are not free. We don't get to choose our desires or the personalities that drive us. But just because we didn't get to choose our desires and we didn't design our personalities and our agency from birth doesn't mean that we don't have them. And once we have them, we want to be free to express them and follow them and apply them, and not having to contort ourselves into somebody else's meaning and life framework. But yeah, ultimately our choices are driven by our desires, which we did not get to create or decide on for ourselves. I think that to a large extent, the more unpleasant a person's present moment is, the more they desire to escape it through intense meaning and purposes that are provided by religion or through other distractions like drugs and alcohol. I do very much view religion as a type of drug that assists people in escaping reality. But if you're clinging to a new worldview in order to infuse yourself with meaning and purpose to get through the suffering, how beneficial that's going to be is dependent on how accurate the worldview is. Because an inaccurate worldview sabotages you from being able to correct your situation. So the best route, I would say, is to construct for ourselves dependable meaning and purposes that do map to reality and help us to be effective at reaching our goals. As people's life situations improve, they tend to move away from clinging to religion. And that's why we see in the poorer states, the poorer countries, religiosity is higher. United States is an exception where we have an extremely high GDP, but we also have high religiosity. And I would think that's really correlated to the fact we have high levels of inequality. So just because our country is wealthy, this doesn't mean that our average person, our working and middle class, are feeling healthy and secure enough that they don't need religion. So I think a great idea is that when we have the bandwidth to, we should work and strive to create meaning and purpose for ourselves, to have a go-to for those times of need, so that we're not stuck in a bind and accepting false worldviews that give us meaning and purpose. Viktor Frankl, who's a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor, was thrust into this position of immense suffering where he desperately needed to find a way to draw meaning to keep going in his life. Something was driving him to want to survive. He just struggled to make the work to create meaning, and that helped him get through the present moments of intense suffering. He struggled with the psychological experience of being imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp. And one of his famous quotes is, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." I think this really encourages us to take those steps to find what's meaningful to us, to learn about ourselves more, and to become who we are, as Nietzsche says. This is in stark contrast to the idea of Christianity, where we're just absorbing what Jesus and God's purposes are for us. Instead, we take the more responsible approach of defining it for ourselves and finding it from within us. So this is to take a step of being creative about your own life, which, if you're like me, you've never been given permission to do that through Christianity. But your life will come and go and pass you by if you're waiting around for the Christians in your life and the pastors to give you permission to do this.
And again, you want to heal from the past. You want to heal from the need to still need permission granted to your life in order for you to live it. You are responsible for your life, which means you have permission to live it however you see fit. At no point are you absolved of the consequences for your actions, but that is why you should really ask yourself questions, think about possible outcomes, and then have the courage, cultivate the courage to listen to yourself. You know what the answer is, and all you need now is the courage to take it into action. So taking that internal wisdom and making it real in the outside world, that is what's difficult.
Some believers who are particularly aligned with the thought of God being sovereign and Him dictating our lives are possibly going to feel quite threatened by you being assertive in this way. So don't wait for approval from the Christians in your life or from an imaginary God concept. Don't wait for approval to start building the framework of your life. You don't want to let life pass you by without knowing what your life journey would have looked like had you been given the chance to construct it on your own. Humans love stories, so maybe give some thought to your memories and think about how you would like to interpret them, what lessons you can draw from them, and how you want to express them to others. A lifetime of experiences can feel more meaningful if you're sharing them with others and others are learning from them too. So putting them all into a story that helps you to understand what you've been through might be a great idea. So meaning and purpose often come from the way that we view the world, and some worldviews can just be infused with meaning and purpose. But if they lack that mapping to reality, then they're actually disabling us from being able to live out our values, which ironically ends up being a very nihilistic worldview because you're saying the truth doesn't matter, how effective you are, anything you do doesn't actually matter. So that is one of the many reasons why I choose existentialism over Christianity. Existentialism acknowledges that there is no objective meaning or purpose to our lives, but instead it emboldens us to create, discover, and embrace our own meaning and purposes. This worldview prizes the ideas of radical freedom and radical responsibility. In this light, I would encourage you to think about what is causing you to put one foot in front of the other. What's driving you and keeping you moving forward? Doing this might be the beginning of finding and deriving your own truest purposes in life. Is there really a God seething at me from behind the scenes because I'm rejecting him and authentically pursuing what I perceive to be true? And even worse, I'm talking about it publicly. No, that is not love. That's control. At the core of Christianity is control and power seeking. Despite the Jesus figure supposedly being humble, he's still backed by this God and many teachings and doctrines that are all about controlling us and seeking power. At the core of existentialism is whatever you want for you. So which has more truth, morality, love, purpose, and meaning? My answer is the sweet reality of existentialism and being strong enough to embrace and welcome reality. Well, that's all I have to say today about existentialism. But of course it continues to be part of my life, so I'm sure I'll have more to say in the future. But thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.